Much of the history of real-time strategy games can be traced to North America's West Coast, from Relic in Vancouver, Canada, to EA in the Bay Area, Westwood Studios in Las Vegas, and of course, Blizzard in Irvine. In fact, just north of that campus, tucked away in the urban sprawl of Los Angeles, is a new team attempting to leave their mark on the proud legacy of RTS, a team who've worked on some of the most popular and celebrated real-time strategy games ever made. But they're not trying to echo the achievements of past titles. Their mission is to make a new type of RTS, one that challenges deep-rooted assumptions about what makes this genre what it is. But before we get down to specifics, how about some table setting? First, who are these developers? How did the genre get to where it is today? And why do they think it needs an injection of new ideas?
I want to say PC rooms first started coming out when I was in middle school, and it was surprisingly not StarCraft 1 that made PC rooms happen. It was Red Alert. So me and my friends, we used to go and play every day after school kind of thing, and then StarCraft came out, so every day after school it changed to StarCraft. So I've been a massive StarCraft fan all my life. I was playing a lot of StarCraft in local tournaments, and in one of the tournaments that I won in Vancouver, I happened to play against someone that got top 4 in one of the first Blizzard-sponsored Brood War tournaments back in the day. And that really impressed one of his friends who happened to be working on the balance team as the balance manager at Relic Entertainment. And then so he offered me the job, and I was like, oh, I'd be happy to work at Relic. So that's how I got my first start.
That is where I met David, yes. So David worked there as well. I think he started maybe a few weeks after me. We were both on the same sub-team. Like Relic had a balance team for 2 games. So at the time they had Company of Heroes 1 they were working on. They were also working on Dawn of War Dark Crusade. Me, David, and 2 other guys were working on the Dark Crusade team. So that's where we worked together. I started there back in 2006, and the reason I was hired was because when they released the first expansion pack for Dawn of War, I was the first place player on the ladder. So I was very active in sort of like the community at the time, and also communicating with the current Relic balance team at the time, and they decided to fly me out to Vancouver and bring me in to work on the game.
I was working at Relic when I saw the announcement that Blizzard made. They took the whole development team to Korea, and then they did that announcement of like, hey, we're working on StarCraft 2. It's gonna be like, there's no release date or anything like that, very early stages. But what's kind of funny is Ted Park, who is our art director, he was actually in Korea at the time with the StarCraft 2 development team announcing it together. But for me, I saw that on YouTube while I was at work. So that night, right when I got home, I applied for the position that I thought I could get. And then they flew me down to Irvine, and I did a full day of interviews with the whole team. I got the job, so that's how I came down to Irvine. And I've been here ever since. My job at the start was to work on the game balance of it, but over time I was involved in the unit designs, the map designs, etc. So I ended up going from an associate right when I first started, and then maybe after almost 10 years when I left, I was the lead multiplayer designer. I worked on things like game balance, game mechanics design. I've made most of the melee maps that were released in StarCraft 2. I've mostly stayed in that PvP kind of space within StarCraft 2. And that's where my passion is, and that's where I guess we're taking this game kind of thing, right?
As I played Warcraft 1, and my dad was watching me then, that was 9, and I was like, I want to work for these guys, for this company. I didn't even know who Blizzard was at the time. I was like, I want to work on these games, and specifically this company. All of my life, I think at that point, like for my personal life, was devoted to playing video games and getting good at them. My true love was, for me, was where I played really good was Warcraft 3. I went to Europe and played an AMD PG Challenge. I did play some qualifiers for Canada later to go into WCG, which I don't know if you guys remember WCG back then, World Cyber Games. I decided that I wanted to do engineering and I wanted to make games at that point. When I first started in Battle.net, I was responsible for making sure the service would hold up. The 2.0 version, so it came with StarCraft, and it was all about making sure that all the new games would be on that platform, and StarCraft 2 was the first one on it.
Before this, I actually worked with Gavin over at Blizzard Entertainment. We were working on a game that will never see the light of day.
That project was about 5 years. For me, I think maybe it was a little less for you. It was a very ambitious project, and it was very out of the norm for what Blizzard was doing. And so I think we kind of found ourselves in a position where we were doing kind of unorthodox game development. So a lot of prototyping, experimental stuff. Yeah, that actually was what led me here, is that got canceled. And so I was in a position where I was like, just looking at what was next. And then Mike said, hey, I'm over here, we're doing this. And I said, I don't think people are making RTSs anymore. Are you sure? He said, no, you're going to want to be here. This is...
Also, I was the only artist at the time and I desperately needed help.
Yeah, I was like, how many environment guys do you got? Well, we don't have any. Oh, all right, well, that'll be great then.
Right before OnCap, I was working at BlackBerry Interactive. I was there for maybe 8 years, or over 8 years. Yeah, the first game I worked at BBI was Deserts of Kark. That was a big deal for me. That game, the programmer I am today was born with that project.
I was at Blizzard for over a decade. The titles I worked on all throughout, other than Diablo 3, that was the back end, was Hearthstone, Heroes of the Storm. And I did come back to work on StarCraft 2 Legacy of the Void.
I think I worked on like 10 or 12 games at that time, which is pretty crazy. I always joke with David, it's like he was at Blizzard for basically the same amount of time, right? Because he was only at Relic for a few years, and he has like, 3 plaques or whatever, because he worked on 3 games in 10 years, Blizzard timetable, whereas I got to work on like 10.
There are no shortage of ex-Blizzard employees in the greater Los Angeles area, but the core of Uncapped Games comes from leadership positions at Blizzard and plenty of other RTS studios. But it's not just the pedigree of the team that's key, but also their different perspectives on real-time strategy. RTS titles have some of the most passionate fan bases, each armed with their own belief system around how these games should control, unit balance, and what makes a skillful player. And the team at Uncapped have their own ideas too, much of it based on the fundamental concept of stripping out parts of RTS games that feel like hangovers from a bygone era and focusing down on what makes this genre fun and interesting.
Genres of games, I think, have evolved quite a bit over the years, right? Whereas the core RTS formula, aside from maybe some control changes, like being able to select 255 units instead of 12 units or 8 units, etc. from the 90s. If you look at the UI, for example, UI of an RTS that was released like last year looks very similar to the UI of RTS that existed in the 90s. So I strongly believe the next step for RTS is to kind of question the tradition of RTS and how we make RTS.
I said I worked at Relic. Relic is kind of famous for doing like the tactical RTS, and then Blizzard's famous for doing, I guess you could say, like the classic mixed RTS, and then say Age of Empires is more of like the classic macro RTS. I would say for this game, we're more in that sort of classic Blizzard RTS perspective, in that, we have a lot of the core decision making that comes with a classic RTS, like when to, increase resource income, tech up, when to attack, how to build units, all these kinds of things. But, in a way that's a bit more like manageable and approachable, so you can focus more on decision making rather than the raw, actions component of it.
Even when I first started my career at Relic, there was this thought that RTS is just hardcore, right? And it's hardcore, so we gotta make it more accessible or more approachable. And in order to do that, the only way is to reduce the army count or slow down the game pace kind of thing, right? We talked a lot about like this difference between, there has to be, from a competitive player point of view, player that is good at the macro side of things, which is like building things really well, and then that's how you win games. And then players who are good at the micro side of things, which is people who are controlling what they have. Like they don't have as much as the guy who is good at macro, but they can control these guys really well, so that's how they pull out their wins. And it was a thing that existed in StarCraft 1, and we wanted to bring that over to StarCraft 2. Because there were a lot of improvements like multi-building selection, unlimited unit selection, etc. It made that macro part a lot easier in StarCraft 2. So in order to combat that at the time, we brought in these, macro mechanics. So for the Terran, you have to constantly drop these mules on the resource patches every 50 mana that you have on your command center. For Zerg, you have to keep injecting larvae at every single hatchery that you have. So these were kind of, in hindsight, I would say, tedious tasks that we kind of forced into the game.
But what I had always talked to David about is like when StarCraft 2 Legacy Void, and I was like, why I turned out of the game. It was like, it's getting too complicated. I don't want to worry about all these clicks and all these things and memorizing the builds and how complex the tech trees are, when to do what, specific what. It's like, for me, I always focused on, even, this is why I like Warcraft 3, is Warcraft 3, you didn't need 10 barracks. You didn't need 20 factories. You just needed one building of every type, And as long as you knew what you wanted to build, when you wanted to build it, you were good to go. Not necessarily do you have the execution ability to build, and maintain 75 SCVs or drones and your economy up to gate while doing like 3-4 prong attacks. And that's what it would take to be, a professional level player.
And I have kind of big regrets about it. And I had one chance to fix it, I guess, too, right? I want to say right after or right before the last expansion of StarCraft 2, I tried to get a sense of if players will be okay with us kind of cleaning some of these up, right? And it was like a very good, maybe 50-50 split, so it's kind of hard to decide. And at the time I was thinking, we shouldn't be making such drastic changes to a game that already has existed for almost a decade, that people love for what it is. Hey, but there's gonna be other RTS in the future, even at Blizzard was my guess at the time. So I just said, okay, we'll leave StarCraft 2 the way it is, and then in the next Blizzard RTS game, I was thinking at the time, like, we'll do better in this space.
And from the discussions I've had with David and working with him over the past 6 months or so, like, you can tell that he's been thinking about this for a long time. I think he brought up a story to me of like him actually wanting to work on a project of this nature while he was at Blizzard. He didn't get the opportunity to. I mean, he had a little bit of prototyping work that he was doing there, but then it just stuck with him in the back of his mind for years. So I think coming here and having the ability to build out the team the way that it made sense for that game vision, and bringing in the experts in a lot of this field that have worked across the industry, both on those craft series games, but other RTS games as well, it's just been awesome to see in action. And the fact that he's been thinking about this for so long, so a lot of the iteration that would come with our game, especially as now we're going to the stage where we're bringing in some of the community members to actually play, you can see that a lot of it was deliberate, and it's also made for quick and easy opportunities for things to be able to shift and change because there's such a strong game vision behind it, and he's been thinking about it for so long.
Why do we have to constantly build, say, like supply depots to increase your maximum supply? Like, is that really, like, are players really playing RTS because this is the most fun thing ever, to have to keep track of, like, okay, like every 15 seconds or so, because of my income rate, I have to build a supply depot or two, and then now that my income rate is going a little bit up, now I gotta build that every 8 seconds instead of every 15 seconds. And then while doing that, I'm thinking about, okay, so I have this many production buildings and that many of that other production building, and I have to constantly check back while I'm fighting and while I'm playing the game. I have to check back to see, like, if these units are ready. So there's so much, like, multitasking, so much, I guess, what we would call maybe tedious actions that might not be necessary in experiencing the core fun of RTS. So these are all things that we are kind of putting out there to question and say, what is the core fun and what's the most fun RTS that a player can play? And in a given moment, say you're playing 10 minutes of this game, right? Can we spend majority of those 10 minutes where it's fun?
StarCraft is very heavily an execution game. Not to say there's no strategy or anything, but it's a very execution focused game. So the main way to improve in the game is to execute better. I would say even, for example, Company of Heroes, another game I worked on at Relic, even though it's a very different game with a slower pacing, it's very similar in that same mindset. It's a multitasking, execution heavy game. It's all about microing your squads in very specific ways. Whereas with this game, we want to focus a bit more on having players have the opportunity to improve via other methods, more strategy-based methods. Maybe they choose a different set of units, maybe they choose a different timing, maybe they can more easily grasp those concepts rather than being told oh no, the reason you lost is because you didn't build workers for 10 minutes. No, you stopped building 5 workers for 5 minutes and now you're behind and you just lost, right?
These are kind of the things that were challenging, and we can't say for certain that we're right in everything that we've tried, but we are getting very close to that public playtesting stage of alpha test, beta test, etc. I think that is where we will be able to really get to the meat of, hey, where were we right? Where were we wrong? What have we missed? Etc. Right? And that's where kind of real magic happens. So we're very excited to get there soon.
Uncap Games RTS is based on a lot of theory, but there are theories that the team has been playing and testing internally for over 2 years now. When the project started, they were quick to get fundamentals like pathfinding and level design established, giving them as long a development runway as possible in which they could create dozens of units and combine them in hundreds of different ways. Since then, the team has been playing it constantly, toying with elements of design and testing how it affects the back and forth of matches, all in an effort to tune this game to be as strategically interesting as possible. Once again, the experience of the team is allowing them to build and iterate constantly.
Well, if they can't iterate quickly on what they're building, how do we have the time to make a great game? How can we take the time to, take those risks and learn? We can't really learn anything unless we're in there building it day in and day out. And the more iteration time we have is more hours sunk that we have in the cycle, which just gives us more kicks at the can. A lot of games start out that way. A lot of companies start out that way. But then when you get a little more sluggish, and we call it the creeping normality. Everybody has technical debt, so let's not pretend we don't have any. But the whole point is the technical debt that we have, we try to make sure it's not forward-facing. So anyone working on the project shouldn't be impacted by it. And anytime there is some, we take it seriously.
Before I started with Uncapped, I was at Blizzard Entertainment for 23 years.
I mean, when we first started, especially, our jobs were a lot more similar than they are today. So I mostly a concept art, like designing units. The main thing is, like, you see it, you want to instantly know what that unit is, and you want it to be able to stand out from all the other units on the screen. Choosing units that are going to really obviously be different from each other right off the bat really helps that. And then going from there, you also want roughly to be able to look at a unit in game, maybe you haven't seen it very much before, and have a pretty good idea of what you think it's going to do. Obviously, like, it's a pretty complex game. We're not going to be able to say, oh, I knew exactly like the stats of that unit just by looking at it, but you want to have a pretty good idea of its gameplay implications.
And so one of the big things we kind of concentrate on, not only on the silhouette and making sure that they're unique and that they're readable, another big part of it is the directionality as well too. You need to kind of know when armies are moving away from you or coming towards you. Basically in the RTS space, there's what's called a death ball typically. Once we introduced unlimited selection into RTS space, it became a real thing, right? You're just gonna have a mass of like 10 different units and like dozens and dozens of them all in a pack. So it's kind of important to be able to still separate out what you need to know, like what are the most lethal units in that pile. And then these are all things we kind of learned in our previous experiences as RTS developers.
Your unit composition is very unique to the player. You can choose sort of who you want to bring to the battlefield, which is really exciting. But from a design point of view, like, one of the things that people really like about games is like, I resonate with this faction or that faction, like, and I'm just going to play that. And so we're trying to build a world that caters a little bit to that, but also doesn't feel completely jarring when you maybe want to mix it up a little bit for like gameplay purposes.
And the core game was there before the first map was ever made. And so we would play on a flat plane. And the game was very fun then, but then we start to layer this other stuff in a very slow way. A big part of it is that we just focus on the game as a whole, and so we evaluate decisions on the game as a whole, even if it seems very small, right? Even if the color of our grass is heavily debated. We look at it almost every single week. People have very strong opinions about it. We're always working on it.
Yeah.
And the value and the color of the grass is turning out to be one of the more important environment art things, but that's because it feeds the game as a whole.
I don't know, somebody can fact check me here, but I claim to be one of the first rushers in this game. Like, match starts and I will be attacking your base right away. And it worked out for a bit, but not anymore. I don't know how much we can talk about the specifics of our units, but we have a unit that is very strong at defending, and again, at some point I was very strong with that unit. It even felt overpowered. But again, that's something that doesn't work anymore. I think lately everybody beats me. As I said, I've been doing RTS for 10 years, and I think one of the lucky pieces for me is that Deserts of Karak is a very different type of RTS in terms of how the units behave and how the user interacts with the units is very different than a more classic game like StarCraft, for example. I have a lot of experience. I've been thinking about these problems for a long time. So in a way, a lot of the pieces I already knew what I wanted, like the pathfinding and the obstacles. I have my own recipe of sorts. The problem is simple. I have a map, I have obstacles. I want my unit to just not collide with obstacles. Tell the unit where I want it to go, and it needs to figure that out. And it's going to interact with other units. It's going to interact with other things. It's going to be attacking things. It's going to be attacked by other things. What I like about my own recipe is that it's pretty fast to get working, which was important for this game.
I mean, when I showed up, the pathfinding was already very good, which is like, oh, that's great. That's going to be, having that already in place before you kind of dig into actually making the content has been a real boon for not having to remake stuff. So I originally was brought on to be the lone environment artist. That was kind of the plan. When I joined the team, like the story and the lore, it was already there. People were already talking about it, but it wasn't like kind of like, it hadn't been broken out yet, right? Or it hadn't been polished down a little bit. And I was like, no, you guys are, the universe is here. You guys are talking about it. It had already exists. And they were like, no, it's not really. And I'm like, no, listen, the things that we've made here, right? That that's packaged up. We'll put a wrapper on it. That's like part of the game. So I kind of fell into that. And now I split my time between doing the art for the map and then also writing VO lines, unit descriptions, anything kind of lore or story related. That's where I step in.
So the engineering challenge here, I think the biggest one is like a lot of stuff that I loved or wished I could have been able to do while I was working on StarCraft 2 is something we were able to do here from the ground up.
Our team in general has a very high experience level. Our UI artist, Elaine Yang, has many years of experience creating UIs for games like StarCraft 2, Heroes of the Storm, Overwatch. This is another example of we lean on the expertise of our team to kind of help inform our process.
So what is Uncap's vision? How does this game vary differently to other RTS titles? In what ways do matches unfold? And what exciting new gameplay do they believe will emerge?
What we're, I guess, aiming for is a lot of RTS games, before you can even start, I guess, playing the game, you have a lot of setup to do, right? So in the case of something like a StarCraft, maybe I want to say a few minutes or more, you are repeating the exact same stuff that you've always done 1,000 times if you played 1,000 games, right? Which is, okay, build workers up to that point, and then build a supply depot, and then build a barracks, and you're following this kind of, I guess, build order, and not much changes. Maybe even up to your second base or third base, it's kind of the same every single game, with the occasional exceptions of like if enemy decides to proxy rush or something like that, then it switches things up a little bit, right? In an ideal setting, what we're working on, what we're trying to aim for is right when the game starts, you have some decisions, right? Like I could choose to expand to increase my income rate. I could choose to rush by building a bigger army. Instead of doing that, I can choose to tech to get maybe say like my splash damage units out or my tanky units out. And it's just action from that point onward.
Usually when you would start a match, there's an element of, say, deciding, okay, am I going to make units? Am I going to tech up? Am I going to expand? That's kind of like our core. A number of variables kind of make that more complex. So you kind of have to evaluate, how your set of units matches up against the enemy set of units, and then all those decisions. So a normal match, you might build some units, scout around, choose to expand, choose to tech, and then you kind of have to evaluate, when is your ideal timing to say attack, defend. Like, do you choose to defend directly, or if your army is like weaker in a direct fight, do you try and go for like a base trade or something like that? Like avoid the enemy army and just kill their basic economically, and then come back, kill their army when you have an economic advantage. I mean, we have a lot of these, what I consider at least the classic RTS like decision-making aspects, but we kind of get to it, I would say, a lot faster. So you can focus more on like actually making those decisions.
If two players are sitting back and just building up towards something, and then when they're ready, if they fight, then if you play 10 games like this, then all these games will feel very similar, because all I'm doing is like I'm just building up to this one composition that I want, and then you're doing the same. We fight once, determines the winner, and then if we play 10 times, it feels very similar. Whereas if we focus on as many action moments as possible, every time there's an action moment, the results of that will be very different. So the more moments we have in a given game, if you play 10 games, each of these games, even if you're using the exact same units, and if the enemy is using the exact same units, even in this case, the games will turn out very different. This is kind of our hope, right? You're just focusing on only the fun things. There's a lot of action throughout the whole game. You're controlling big armies and fighting against big armies to hit that army commander fantasy. And this is kind of our goal that we have.
Creating a PvP RTS game which strips out some traditional tenets of the genre is no easy task, and they know all too well that players are going to be rightfully skeptical of such an attempted shift of genre norms. This is why the development team is testing it constantly. Playing each other allows them to gain new insight into how the game works and where they need to focus their energies. It's critical work as they approach their biggest test of all, having people from outside of the company finally test their hypothesis.
Mason, our sound guy, he's pretty new to RTSs, and I would say maybe he's not a PvP gamer. And when I first started, he started maybe a week or two after me. He said, hey, can we play some practice matches? I don't want to look like a fool. I showed him the basics. I'm like, this is how you control guys. And then I hadn't played him again for like 6 or so months, and then the next time we played, he beat me, right? I've been playing RTSs for like 15 years. This dude just beat me, and I'm like, that's really crazy to me. That's super surprising and exciting and like very hard to do intentionally. So like when it comes up, it's like, wow, that's special.
We have someone who was a pro player on Warcraft 3. We have Stefan, who was playing casually Age of Empires 4 when it first came out, and then he just casually got on like top 20 of the ladder kind of thing, right? And then when I asked him, like, how come you never told us, like, you're top 20 on the ladder? And he's like, he said something like, oh, like, it's because I have a kid, so I can't play that much, so I'm not very good. Like, so you can kind of tell the skill level of some of these team members that we have, right?
At the top level for our game, like, there is going to be that potential that, you know, the pros have to execute well as, you know, be strong strategically, but like it's impossible to kind of cap out your skill. Like there is that potential. If you are really good, you can do some crazy stuff.
Because we're talking about a very fast-paced game with large armies, it will come down to things like micro, things like better countering, teching at the right places, attacking enemy, I guess, worker lines at the right places, expansions at the right places, things like these. So I would say it's absolutely important at the highest levels of play. At lower levels of play, what I personally seem to see is less micro, more, I guess, high-level strategy is what I kind of see.
There's really this feeling in our game of one more match, just one more match. And because our game loop is so tight and so efficient, you're able to, almost like a Super Meat Boy or Trials HD, just something happens in one game, all right, go to the next one, try something else, go to the next one, try something else, a different unique composition.
What I love about StarCraft 2 that our game kind of takes is like the bigger unit battles, the more to play with, more options, more tools at your disposal. And where Warcraft 3 was great, it just didn't have the scale. And StarCraft 2 had the scale, but it had just too much complexity. So what we have in our game is we have the scale without the significant complexity of all the extra things you need to do. So you can focus on the game just like you would focus on Warcraft 3 when you're in battles, but you do it all the time. And you do this from the first second the game starts.
So one of the cool things that we're kind of doing as part of this road to our journey of putting this game out is putting on a summit where we're bringing in some of the thought leaders of the space in the RTS community, also the mobile community and the general strategy game community to actually come in and provide feedback to our game. And after seeing and playing the game for years internally for all of our team members to get that outside perspective. And it's awesome that by the time this comes out, this will already have happened. And it's a little nerve-wracking, like I said before, but we're really excited because we know how much fun the game actually is.
We've had this gameplay for a while. We've been playing it with a really small sample size, like just mainly amongst ourselves. And I'm really curious how players will respond, right? Like, we're just gonna put it in the game. You guys could taste the soup, right? Tell us how it is.
Once we announce the game and we go into closed beta, from that point onwards, we want to be as direct, as honest, as transparent as possible with the community and work on, I guess, the design iteration together. What we really are hoping for is we want to use kind of that expertise, that passion, that, I guess, knowledge that the players will develop over time as they play a lot of this game.
It's really going to be interesting now that we've just been siloed away. Like, okay, we're building this thing. Everyone on the team feels good about it. We think we've made these decisions for the. I mean, I can justify my decisions, but whether people actually like that down the line, fingers crossed.
Getting that public reaction of something visual it's a really visceral experience. Many artists, they'll work on a project for so long, but because of NDAs or whatever project confidentiality, they don't get to show anybody during that entire time. And so there are times where it's like a project might fail before it reaches that final step of showing it to the world, and it's kind of a devastating process. So for us, like getting to the stage now where we're on the verge of showing the whole world, it's a lot of validation, And we're very curious to see how the world will react to it. You know, there's no guarantees there, but at the same time, it's like you spend all this time to make a beautiful baby. You want to show the baby to the whole world, and you want that baby to like experience the world in a way too. And so for us, yeah, it's going to be a really exciting time, I think, when we eventually announce the game and, you know, show it to everyone. We really hope everyone resonates and likes what we made. But yeah, at the same time, the effort of putting everything in there it's a reward in itself in a lot of ways.
Uncapped have been working on this new breed of RTS in secret for a few years now, but they're just about ready to share it with the rest of the world. Stay tuned to Summer Game Fest in June for the big reveal. One of the most passionate fan bases, each armed with their own belief system around how these games should control.
The verge of showing the whole world.
New insight into how the game works and where they need to focus their energies. It's critical work as they approach their biggest test. One of the most passionate fan bases, each armed with their own belief system around how these games should control.
A big part of it is that we just focus on the game as a whole.
Our UI artist, Elaine Yang, has many years of experience creating UIs for games like StarCraft 2, Heroes of the Storm, Overwatch.
Which is really exciting, but from a design point of view, like one of the things that people really like about games is like, I resonate with this faction or that faction, like, and I'm just gonna exactly like the stats of that unit just by looking at it, but you want to have a pretty good idea of its gameplay implications.
And so one of the big things we kind of concentrate on, not only on the